I love when Eastern European accounts try to catch me with their ChatGPT, and when in fact these are things that I've touched upon, things that I've debunked because I actually have over a decade of this niche, right? So we're gonna touch upon this, but first I want to touch on something that was said about the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are not binding, which is something that I've said time and time again. Originalism is not binding to constitutionalism, so why does originalism drive judicial opinion, right? It cannot subvert constitutionality, and in fact, if it is true that the Federalist Papers is not actually binding, which is something that even though Republicans love to actually push originalism, they don't like Federalist 9 and 10, which is one against insurrections, right? They also don't like Federalist 28, which allows for the state to reach to the same equal power as the federal, right? They don't like this, yet they love Federalist 78 through 83, at least portions of it, because the only reason that the Supreme Court and the courts in general actually are held to power is because of legislation that was created through the inspiration of Federalist 78 through 83. That's what guided it, which means that Article 3 isn't why our courts have power. So if the Federalist Papers is not binding, then do our courts actually have power? They seem to not have the authority that they do, right? If we have the same actual argument. But what they will say is because legislation, right? But if legislation is only derived from the Constitution and the Constitution needs to give the authority and Article 3 is incomplete, then what he's saying is that obviously the courts don't have any power. Which, if he said that, I would agree. And that reality, why are we listening to them, right? This is the complications. If originalism isn't actually binding, then why are we acting like it is? But let's go through the ChatGPT list that they gave us. One is about the Titan submersible, that we didn't spend a lot of money on it, which is false. We spend way too much money for people who had already died. That's ridiculous. We shouldn't have spent anything. They gave us some little breadcrumbs. They may be alive. They weren't. They knew that. We just wasted a bunch of money because we just wanted to give an illusion that they were trying, which is what happens now, right? The U.S. Marshals are the enforcement and security arm of the federal judiciary. This is the thing, because you go and look at ChatGPT and it tells you this. And the reality, right, if you have knowledge beyond that, is that the administrative agencies are under the executive. It's under POTUS, right? Which is why POTUS is having control over them. Like, people thought that I was making that up until now they're saying that it's true. Because he has control over them. You cannot argue that. He's showing it. They are the ones who have least direct control from the executive branch. That's untrue. That is simply untrue. Like, it's proven to you right now that that is untrue. And traditionally, through rules and regulations, they are independent, but there's no actual guardrails to force that. So it's untrue. So that's wishful thinking. Relating to the caption, the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution does state that federal law preempts state law. It does not state that. It does not state that. It states that the Constitution is the law of the land. It's in English. Do you want to read it again? It says that everything else is derived from the Constitution and that supremacy, right? And within Federalist 78 through 83, which it gives a guideline as to what this is supposed to mean, it literally has all possible quotations that says as much. That the Constitution cannot be overthrown by anything, including any lower kind of principles, any lower kind of laws, any lower kind of branches, any lower kind of anything, right? It cannot be overthrown. Article 5 is the only thing that can change it. In English, the Constitution can change U.S. law. U.S. law cannot change the Constitution. Only Article 5 can change the Constitution, not the Supreme Court's, the Constitution. And unless that changes through Article 5, that's how it is, which is why the courts use the Federalist Papers, why the courts use the text. So obviously, if you're saying the Federalist Papers is not binding, you have to talk to the Supreme Court, because that's their power. The Supremacy Clause is not about the federal above the states, and this is how we know that this individual is probably more prone to MAGA, right? Because they're trying to do a catch me. I just Googled ChatGPT this, and I was told this, but I know beyond ChatGPT. I know a lot of different sources, primary sources, so I can tell you that the Supremacy Clause isn't about the federal above the states. It is about the Constitution above everything else, including the federal, which is literally within our Federalist Papers, which guides why the Constitution exists. Right? So how about you go read that, Federalist 78 through 83, and then come back? because that tells us what supremacy clause actually means. And no, the federal cannot subvert constitutional supremacy. So that's where the state gets the power, because that is a constitutional crisis. A secession, even a soft one, is super duper extremely illegal. And you know what's also illegal because it's unconstitutional? You know, treating U.S. citizens as foreigners, right? Including myself. I'm a U.S. citizen, born and raised here, yet I can be stopped. But that's forbidden by what? The Equal Protection Clause. What about due process, right? What about birthright citizenship? So obviously, the constitutional crisis is that what should be unconstitutional isn't. What should be a violation isn't, because of consolidation of power. Now, you don't have that background of that consolidation of power, but I through my legal jurisprudence background, I went into authoritarianism, right? So that's the difference between me and you. I actually have it up here to know beyond ChatGPT, right? And that's the thing. Self-secession, right, isn't necessarily as illegal as full secession, because that is things like removing federal funding and actually going back to where we were like free states and not free states, right? That is things that are within our avenues, right? And full secession, that argument would be, well, it would be illegal over constitutionality. If the Constitution is optional, then that's also optional. That's the thing, that we think that there's laws for us, but not laws for them. And if it doesn't apply to them, then it's a gray zone for us. And that's the creativity that we have to garner to, because constitutional crisis allows for more than tradition. And if this person can refuse this, but that's just how it works. American theory positions that. The only body that can end federal taxes in the U.S. is the U.S. Congress. Withholding federal taxes is obviously illegal, no matter how much we disagree with the policies that they fund. And that's the thing, because you keep thinking that we're within the same functioning government. There are guidelines as to what a constitutional crisis looks like, and you're not actually looking through that. You think that by justifying through the traditional rules and regulations that you can understand what powerlessness we have, which is where you're getting to, right? You want to see it as we're powerless, and we're not. We're not, because what you just said is something that would be applicable during America that isn't in crisis, but that is not true, right? Everything that you promoted would be true if there was a much more consistent constitutional health. But we're in a constitutional crisis, which means that rules and regulations are being violated and they're being consolidated, right, for a purpose. And that purpose is against constitutionality. And that in itself allows for the states to go against the federal and full equal force of it, right? To say it much better. Do you understand? Because I have over 10 years of experience through all different fields in order to come to these conclusions. You've only had ChatGPT. And here's the thing. You can have an illusion of how this government should work, but it's not working how it is, which is where we go to American theory. Because at the end of the day, like you said, the Federalist Papers isn't binding. So why do the courts have power if Article 3 is incomplete? Because obviously it matters, right? It matters. But you want to pick and choose, just like you pick and choose in the Bible. And that's the thing. We're going to use your same strategy in order to beat you at your game.